Is an atheist better at Christian apologetics than a Christian? Stay tuned to find out. My atheist brothers and sisters, welcome to another episode of Noah's Snark. I'm your host, Atheist Joseph Vina, aka AJV. And today, you might dislike what I'm about to do. Today, I'm going to help Christian apologists defend biblical slavery by giving them a better defense than the typical defenses they've been using. Note here that by better, I don't mean good, but this defense is better than the three most common defenses they typically employ, which fail so easily, so miserably, I feel like it's necessary to help them think about it since they won't do any thinking of their own. And I detest people who don't take a second to think. It's perhaps humanity's greatest weakness. First, let's review the three common defenses for biblical slavery. Number one, those were the times, which doesn't make any sense if God came before civilization and could have issued the edict, do not own other human beings as property, at any time prior to the establishment of any civilization or society. This defense also implies God is such a poor leader, his quote-unquote chosen people constantly ignore his commands, doing whatever they want despite the alleged demonstration of God's wrath with a worldwide flood. Do keep in mind this particular defense for later, though. Number two, slavery in the Bible is talking about indentured servitude, an incredibly ignorant defense when it's not an outright lie, because all scholars of the Bible and of history I've ever heard, except for maybe one, say chattel slavery absolutely is mentioned in the Bible, and for fuck's sake, you can even read it for yourself in Leviticus chapter 25, verses 44 to 46. And at number three, slavery actually is acceptable because yada yada yada, divine command theory. And this defense is always used by people who think it's impossible for themselves to ever end up as a slave as they angrily type out comments to own the libs on Twitter 24/7. The joke being they're a slave to social media, just like Donald Trump is on Truth Social at 2 o'clock in the morning. All of these defenses, they would be laughable if they weren't so sad, so I'm going to help my theistic brothers and sisters out a little bit because, well, I'm a nicer guy than the Abrahamic God. Now, the defense I'm about to present, I know someone's thought of it before. I know I'm not the first to come up with this because I checked. It's just that I never hear apologists use it when they should be using it. Mind you, this defense isn't bulletproof. It has problems, but I feel it is a far better defense than the other defenses I mentioned earlier. Let's start by supposing God is a being outside of our space and time that doesn't experience time like we know it. And here I don't mean that God is atemporal, that is, a being not experiencing time in any way, because that would be stupid. An atemporal being can't do anything. So I'm talking more about Aquinas' formulation of the word atemporal, which still allows God to do things somehow. Instead, God sees our time all at once, the entire history of our universe laid out before them. In the philosophy of space and time, this ontology of the universe amounts to eternalism, or the block theory of the universe, which is the view that all existence in time, past, present, and future, is equally real, as opposed to presentism or the growing block universe theory of time, in which at least the future is not the same as any other time. And yes, I realize this raises questions on its own. For example, why do we perceive a difference in past, present, and future if that's not the true state of the universe? But let's put that aside for the moment. If it's the case God exists and sees our universe in this way, God has issued commands in what seems like our past that are appropriate for the culture at a certain time of hours. It may be that God issued these commands when they did as a way to help, quote unquote, future generations see the immorality of owning people as property. Not that this appears to be working. From our point of view, it would seem like our morality is evolving when in fact it could never have evolved without these apparently immoral commands in the quote unquote past. Yes, this means terrible harm was done in what we call the past, but it has led to a better world later in which we now condemn slavery, at least if you're not an evangelical Christian. This is vaguely similar to the theistic free will defense that posits some evil is necessary to actualize a net good. And I do hate this aspect of the free will defense merely for the fact that this net good is only supposed and cannot be quantified. So it could be argued, in my opinion, that biblical slavery laws reflected temporary accommodations for an ancient culture that could not have helped itself and is not God's moral ideal, which we would realize, quote unquote, later. Yes, God knows slavery is wrong, but he was giving the best rules he could have for the times in which the people could not have understood slavery as wrong. God could still be morally righteous, notice I'm not saying perfect, in issuing these commands because it would still be the best practice at that time that led to better future outcomes. And I hope you've grasped the idea by now without me using a syllogism. Slavery was right when God commanded it in order for us to understand in the future that it's morally wrong. And I believe this prevents viewing God as being morally arbitrary. Now, this argument isn't perfect, but you have to admit it's a better defense than the three I mentioned earlier, because I don't think this defense undermines claims that God is good in an overall sense, though still not morally perfect in any sense. Why not? My counter-argument, were I to come up against this defense of biblical slavery, would be, why did God make the universe in this blocked way, so to speak, in such a way that the creations he placed within it, that being people, could understand his moral desires at one time and not at this other time? It opens up the can of worms that predestination presents. For example, God, in seeing all of time at once, knows who's going to hell and who is not, if hell is part of one's theology. Why would God do that if God is omnibenevolent? That would be the nail in the coffin for this argument, or for at least God's attribute of omnibenevolence. But at least asking the question about why God constructed a block universe to be the way it is requires a moment's more thought than the easy objections to those other defenses. So there you have it, a better, meaning still not that great, defense of biblical slavery. You're welcome, my Christian brothers and sisters, who I'm sure will now try to look at the criticisms of their God from the perspective of non-believers, because apologists are nothing if not fair people. And that will do it for this episode of Noah's Snark. If you like this kind of content, kindly like and subscribe. Until next time, be kind and God bless.